wanted to talk with a good friend of the show, a man who was for years an officer for the Central Intelligence Agencies, a Marine Corps veteran. He also founded and helps run a very important organization called the Association for the Recovery of Children, which rescues children that have been human trafficked, rescues them without their captors even knowing that it is happening. He's also an alum from the Blacklist on NBC, and I hope he returns to the show to bring insights on the Minnesota riots that are ongoing now and continuing. Pleased to be welcomed once again by Bazzel Baz on this special report here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Baz, my friend, welcome back. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's good to be here again, always with you. Thank you so much.
So let's talk about the riots in particular in Minneapolis,
Sure.
because we've seen the flames. I was on a Minnesota radio show late last night talking about how in Denver we started to see a microcosm of riots, nothing so elaborate. Things petered out a little bit, but still we've seen vandalism. We've seen all sorts of things that are happening, and it is well beyond frustration and anguish over the senseless death of a unarmed man by police. It's now something that has taken on a life of its own. And by the way, we talked about the possibility on this program, you and I, Bazzel Baz, for civil unrest, particularly as a result of these long-term lockdowns, because people are cooped up for an extended period of time.
Right, you did, Jimmy. So let's go back to the hypothetical platform. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, that the death of George Floyd was not an accident. And let's say that those people that committed, if it comes to the courts and it's a crime and we've all watched it, and let's say those people end up being protected. And let's say that the killing of an innocent individual was used to stir up the flames in a community that has already been incarcerated because of COVID. And we know, because I've dealt in this before, anytime you have this type of environment, it is just ready to explode on its own anyway. And let's say that was done on purpose to flame the fire. And in addition to that, let's say hypothetically that Antifa and a number of other paid, organized disturbance makers, or whatever we want to call them, have now been sent out ahead of time to multiple cities other than Minneapolis. And what we are now seeing as a result of that, because if we can fuel that flame or that fire even greater, then what happens is now it breaks out in every state in the United States. And on top of breaking the back economically for Americans, it's now creating such a disturbance that you can't hold an election in November because the country is in such an uproar. And let's say hypothetically that the next thing we could see is that someone, whoever that someone is, has now managed to put weapons in the hands of Antifa. And so the riots now escalate to the point that what we are looking at is Antifa with powerful weapons, AKs, M16s, rocket launchers, the whole thing. And now all of a sudden, for the first time in our country, you're watching the military be called in. The president has no choice, because now we're looking at combatants, just like in Iraq, just like in any place else. And you're watching what we call combat in the built-up area. You're watching our tier one operators now going from building to building, fighting off an enemy, fighting off who they may be. I don't think this is a community. I don't think it's other Americans. I think it's paid Antifa members or people like that. And now, for the first time on television, we're literally watching combat in the streets of Minnesota. And I don't think, I can tell you one thing, Antifa wouldn't win. But in addition to that, now we're into a different phase, which is now called martial law. And then for martial law, you have people now collecting up the weapons of all people in Minnesota, saying, we're going to give these weapons back to you later after all of this is over. But then what happens is, you now watch the encroachment of a socialist military rule. I'm not saying that the president is doing this. I'm saying that these are things that can develop, because We watched it happen in foreign countries, the same identical power, the same identical plan. So generally speaking, from, and I'm going to use it boldly, a democratic socialist standpoint or a deep state standpoint, you create the problem, you become the solution, and now people are beholden to that solution. And once you get martial law in place, under quote unquote, it's needed, and people feel a little safe, then guess what you have? You have martial law. And you don't get your weapons back, and you don't get your freedoms back, and you don't get liberties back, because now people are in fear that they're going to have the same thing happen again. Not unlike, sort of, the COVID situation. People are in such fear that those people that aren't doing their own research, their life has stopped. But for a lot of people that are doing their research and are starting to ask the hard questions, they're asking questions like this, Jimmy. Wait a minute. We have 10 or 15 other types of COVID out there. I'm just using that as an example. There are, and other viruses. Then why is it not important that we develop vaccines for those things? But yeah, why is all the emphasis here on the COVID-19? And now all of a sudden we've got to have a vaccine for this, and life's got to stop. And Target can be open, and Costco can be open, but the backbone of America, the
Sure.
little business, man, why
So
can't they be open?
I think the argument would be we've lost about 100,000 Americans to this particular strain of the coronavirus, and therefore you needed to take these particular actions. But I want to certainly that's the argument. But I do want to make a couple of points on what you were saying there, Bazzel Baz, our guest again, longtime CIA officer, and of course an alum of the Blacklist on NBC. When we look at the dynamics of the lockdown, a lot of Americans have just been accepting what we've been told and said, okay, fine, we trust you. However, to the extent that there are real people who are not sort of, and I think that there are certainly paid people from Antifa. There probably are, as you're pointing to, and what have you, from different types of organizations to literally stoke the flames of what we're seeing. I think there are also a lot of regular, everyday people who are caught up in this, particularly because they feel like they cannot trust anybody. There is a crisis of credibility. And so while maybe we could see some more expansions of government authority, as we have been seeing, Michigan is still a place of tyranny in this country because of Governor Gretchen Whitmer, just as one example. We also are seeing a lot of Americans who are not on board, starting to distrust authorities, starting to distrust government and media and politicians and scientists and medical professionals and all sorts of people, hence why you can get an expansion of this kind of unrest. And so I think that that's important to keep in mind, but also important to keep in mind is last night, the 3rd Precinct Police Station in Minneapolis was abandoned by police and then ransacked. That is a police station that clearly has arms, I would assume, and also has documents and other things in there. And while they were still policing the area, they were not preventing people from getting in there. And it was ransacked, to your point about people getting weapons and expanding that kind of unrest. Make no mistake about it, Bazzel Baz, we are in a dangerous situation right now.
We are. I think there's 3 types of people we're dealing with. We're dealing with those people that want to respect George Floyd and his family. I think his family even said, look, he would not want to see this happening in our city, of course. Number 2, we always have these people, and I'll say it boldly too, that aren't Americans. They don't even act like Americans. They're just using the situation to ransack, to steal, to kill, to loot. We saw it here in the riots back in California. We saw the same thing. Those type of people that's just criminal. That's just criminal. And then we have those people that don't trust anyone, and they're doing their research to find out, look, I don't trust what's going on with authorities. I don't trust what's going on with my state governor right now. I don't trust this and this and this, and I'm concerned about that. And those people are kind of on standby. So what we see when it comes to conflict is, look, the people that are looting and stealing and destroying, that's what they're doing. They're destroying. They're taking advantage to steal. They're criminal. I hope the police do go after them. And I hope they are found guilty of theft, murder, whatever it may be. Then you've got other Americans that are standing by, and they're going to have to fight on 2 fronts, and they're not sure where it is. Is it all of a sudden now there's going to be a military there's going to be martial law, and I've got to be concerned about the military and who are they really working for, or and the police, and do I have to worry about these criminals that are going to try to break into my house as well? I will say my guidance to the state of Minnesota and anyone's like good Americans that have their guns that are law-abiding citizens, they better keep them. That's it, you know. And if the police are asking for assistance, you know, or the police, the thing about the George Floyd thing, it wasn't every police officer.
Right.
And I've already talked to police officers that are furious about what took place with the police officers that were involved in the incident with George Floyd. And they are shamefully pissed off at those law enforcement officers. And some of them are saying they shouldn't even be here. Look at what this is creating. And what's wrong is wrong. So I hope that the people there, and I think a lot of people realize it's not the whole department, because there's a lot of police officers that have laid their life on the line for a lot of citizens in the state, and they do a good job. Those police officers that were involved with the George Floyd situation, that's to be determined. And I'm not going to say right or wrong, but look, what we saw in the video is pretty questionable. It's like, why was that happening? Why did that take place? Was it excessive force? No doubt about it. You get that. Yeah. But what I'm seeing, Jimmy, is that there are people, and whoever those people may be, that are going to take advantage of this situation. And here's what most Americans need to understand, is that this is very organized. You can't move people into each state and organize riots the way they're being organized without coordination, without some type of preemptive discussions, whatever it may be. I did this in other countries for a living, and I know what it takes to get organized and to get the word out to people. Antifa and all of those groups, whoever those other groups may be, they need to know where police are going to be. They need to know what they can burn down. They need to know where they can move in the city. They need to navigate the fault lines of security all around, because they don't want to be caught. And so what we're seeing happening down here, it is organized. And so the question is, why the disruption? What are they trying to do? I believe personally, and it's just based on my experience, that whoever is supporting Antifa, whoever is supporting these organized groups to burn, destroy, loot, and you're right, Jimmy, there are other people, as we talked about, they're criminals, and they just go along, and they go, I'm going to break into Target, I'm going to steal this, I'm going to do this and this and this. There is money that is paid, there are discussions that are had in secret, and it is very organized, and that's why I was concerned, what's the next organized thing going to be? And so I hope I'm wrong, but I think the next organized thing we're going to see, Jimmy, is I think somebody's going to distribute weapons, and that I talked about, I think that's the next thing we're going to see. And if that happens, then the police force probably decided we're moving out of the area because now we're bringing in the National Guard. Make no mistake about it.
Yeah.
Some of these National Guard have had time downrange. They've been in Iraq. They've been in Iran. This reminds me, there was a time, I think this was 20 years ago maybe, there was literally a questionnaire going around to all the military throughout most of the departments. And one of the questions on there from the Pentagon was, would you ever fire on Americans? I think we had 30% of the returns were, yes, I would. And then 70% I would never fire on an American. It's interesting to see how that is going to unfold, and what type of animosity is going to develop from having the National Guard on, basically trying to enforce the law, so to speak, or prevent civil unrest. We are looking at an interesting scenario here, which is not just American people, good, law-abiding American citizens creating a problem. Someone else is creating a problem, and other people are jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah. So,
and the timing of it is just perfect. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
That's why I think that there is a strong likelihood that there's at least a combination of those factors, because you do have people who have been cooped up, who've been frustrated, going through emotional, mental strain. They've been out of work. They've been at home, all of that. And so you just need something to light the match. And literally you start seeing the city go in flames because of an incident like the killing of George Floyd at the hands of police officers that sort of lights the match. But then you have those people who are opportunists who decide, you know what, I'm really going to play on this, make it even worse. And then you have two storms that are coming together and causing even more travesty. Now, it may be the case that the majority of people even who are engaging in these riots are people who are just average, everyday folks jumping into the fray because they're ticked off, they're pissed off, they don't like what's happening, they've been cooped up, they're frustrated, all those kinds of things coming together. And then you have people who are playing out this thing and trying to make it all the more worse. So you have a combination of factors at play here where even if maybe there are a smaller number of people who are intentionally trying to stoke the flames, you have enough people bringing together those forces to cause chaos.
You do. Well, add on the top of that, we had like in the governor of California, Gavin Newsom letting all the prisoners out of jail, right? In a time
Not
when
all,
they were already
but some,
quarantined.
yes. We've seen some early release.
Yeah,
In Colorado, we've seen some early release as well. One guy was murdered. An innocent man, I believe, was murdered after a guy who had been, I think maybe even an illegal immigrant. I'm trying to remember, but somebody was released from prison early in Colorado, and it resulted in a death.
So liken it to this. You got a barbecue and you need to put some lighter fluid on it, right? What do? Let the prisoners out. These decisions.
You said that on this show. You said that, yeah.
It's supposed to be made by leaders, right? Just because they're the governors, their leadership sucks. I'm telling you. None of this makes sense unless of course, it's somewhat staged. Again, not trying to be conspiratorial, but saying what person in their right mind, even though you've already got quarantined prisoners, would let them out in society. Now they're not quarantined, and you're trying to tell everybody to stay quarantined. And then you start telling people you can't go outside, and if you do, we're going to send the militia or the police, and we're going to arrest you. So now you're containing people. It's like you said, it's like these two storms getting ready to collide. So you set all of this up for conflict because anybody in their right mind would have never done that. I mean, it's a high school student. I mean, I've had these discussions and they're going, that's really dumb. I don't understand that. Why would somebody do that kind of stuff? And then we have this situation happening here. And so I think one of the things that we will have to look at here in the future, Jimmy, is what happens over the course, I think, of the next week here in America. Because the people that would love to destroy our great nation want people to fight against each other. They want civil war. They want conflict. They want disruption so that this current administration, for one, who I believe is for the people, and by the way, by the people, I believe they want to put so much of a load on this administration's back that they find it difficult to continue to run the country. And I have it from very, very good sources out of the Secret Service and other friends that the President of the United States is not short of, like most presidents of the United States, from having death threats on him. But I honestly believe that whatever these forces may be, as we said when we started this conversation, hypothetically speaking, if they are the opposition of this administration, I honestly believe, based on my experience from being on the other side of the tracks in foreign countries, that they literally will stop at nothing. And I mean that. They will stop at nothing to make sure that the President of the United States, President Trump, does not get reelected. And when people go to what degree, I mean to the nth degree.
Well, let me just read a quote from Nikita Khrushchev, who said, quote, "We cannot expect the Americans to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist their elected leaders in giving Americans small doses of socialism until they suddenly awake to find they have communism." In other words, all from the inside. In America, They just had to, Khrushchev's philosophy was they just had to help things move along in the direction of more and more government control. It wasn't going to be that they were going to have some sort of communist uprising like happened to bring about the Soviet Union or the Chinese Communist Party and those regimes, among many others. He knew that it was going to have to be different in America, and so I think we do have to be mindful of that. But also, I want to put up, we have some B-roll footage of this. Early this morning, a CNN reporter was arrested by police while reporting in the middle of Minneapolis. They surrounded him and his 3 camera crew members and then put them all in handcuffs. Now, they were released about an hour later, but CNN literally caught this live. They even set down the camera, had it set down. They had been moved because the police, according to the reporter, they had been listening to the police as they told them to go ahead and move. And so they did. And then suddenly this is what you see in terms of this kind of an arrest for about an hour. And these things I could see, if this continues and gets worse and worse, this kind of thing could happen more and more. And we're seeing the talk about tracing and tracking with surveillance in terms of the COVID-19 and what have you. I mean, there are a lot of things that certainly are deeply concerning in this country right now, Bazzel Baz.
There are, when I see that type of thing happening, look, I'm not a fan of CNN, but I will tell you that reporter and his camera crew, probably, I would make an assumption that they're Americans filming an American event. It's their right to do that, unless they were in I want to say a tactical setting, meaning they wouldn't leave and the police were concerned that they were going to get hurt. And so they said, okay, we're going to arrest you, so we get you out of here. That could have been the truth. It could have happened that they knew that it was dangerous and they didn't want to have to be able to protect them and try to protect their lives. It could be that, or it could be just the opposite. It could be what we've seen in fascist countries. It could be like, we aren't allowing you your freedoms. We're not going to let you film this. And guess what? We're going to arrest you because we can arrest you. And then, of course, let them go later because they realize they don't have anything to hold them on. So it's two different things we have to look at happening here.
Well, another thing, a possibility is it could be a mix of both. That is to say, their goal could have been, hey, we want to get you out of the way because we don't want you here for your safety and for ours. But at the same time, the CNN crew were like, literally on camera, they were saying, tell us where we need to go. Please, we'll move. We don't need to stay here. They didn't need to actually arrest them. They were willingly saying, we'll move. Just tell us where we need to go.
Well, then in that, it's like, okay, I would question that too. It's like, so maybe what they didn't want is, as they had to handle rioters or whatever, maybe they didn't want it on film, and because maybe they thought it was going to be incriminating later. But, that's kind of silly because everybody else, probably every person that's rioting probably has a cell phone with them and they'd be recording all that too. But it's going to be hard to say. But I think it's worth having the conversation with the reporter and his crew one day to say, what happened there? What really happened there? And then go from there. I do have concerns in our country with any time our freedom of speech is curtailed, to be honest with you. I have concerns at any time there is any force, whether it's law enforcement, military, people like ourselves or people of authority, just simply saying, we're going to do what we want to do when we want to do. Now, in all fairness to the police there, and like I said earlier, there's a lot going on right now. They have a lot on their plate. I'm trying to figure out who they're dealing with, how organized it is. I can bet you, Jimmy, that they too have already considered the fact that perhaps the next go round, they're going to be weapons that have been out. They may have gotten their own intel to say, hey, we have it on good authority that, guess what? Antifa just got 3 rocket launchers and 37 AK-47s and grenades and all that. That's a reality that can happen. But no one's going to believe it until it happens, and then they're going to look back at the show and they're going to go, oh my gosh, you guys talked about this. Well, we're not talking about it to scare people, and we're not talking about it to be conspiratorial. We're talking about it because it is a natural line of progression anytime you're in a society that has disturbances. And these won't be law abiding citizens, as I said, Jimmy. They'll be organized groups that are there to disturb the peace, either to harm civilians, harm police, and or just create enough havoc around the United States
Sure.
that the federal government has their hands
So,
full.
so let's get just a few minutes left with you, Bazzel Baz. Let's get
Yeah.
down to sort of the brass tacks of you've said some things that suggest reality. You've said some things where you say hypothetically speaking. How are we to assess what's actually real? What do you think is actually provable and demonstrable at this point? What is just sort of theorizing based on, say, experience dealing with civil unrest and even stoking it in other countries around the globe for the CIA, as you have done?
I use the term hypothetical platform in the very beginning of this, Jimmy, because anytime you have anybody that's speaking on this subject matter, they always think they're conspiratorial. You know very well we've talked about this stuff happening months before, and now it's unveiling. In fact, you know very well that we've talked about things on your show, and they've all come true. That's based on the information that I received because I have certain relationships that still exist. And it's also mostly based on a lot of my experience. And I've kind of qualified my statements by saying, this is what we did here. So I know what it smells like and I know what it sounds like before it happens. So, do I believe that it can unfold that way? Absolutely, I do. I believe there is probably a 70% chance that that is the next stage. As I said, uh, I, I am pretty sure that the socialist democratic representatives that exist in this country today that are highly tied to globalists will do whatever it takes to make sure elections don't take place in November or to create such a problem in the United States that the country could plummet into some type of quote unquote civil war, so to speak. They would love nothing more than that. But I want to encourage Americans in our country to remember that united we stand and divided we fall. And we may have our differences in the country, but what we have is a great country. We have a constitution, we have a Declaration of Independence, we have some pretty amazing things that nobody else in the world has as long as we stand united and remember that it's we the people. I believe this administration with all my heart is about that. I, I can't agree with every bit of delivery any politician or any president ever puts out there, but I think they're doing a pretty darn good job here. And I have it on good authority out of Washington that, as I mentioned earlier, a deep state does exist. A war has continued uh, within the ranks of bureaucracy and other places. And I think that what we're starting to see now, we need to pay very, very close attention to it because if it escalates, the question is going to be for Americans, how do we protect ourselves? Or are we relying on the military or quote unquote the National Guard?
So,
And if you see, Jimmy, I'm so sorry, I mean,
go ahead,
but
go
the
please.
very first time you see martial law established, then we have some really big concerns.
Well, let me say that Joe Biden and certain other Democrats have asked the question, could Trump postpone the election? Could Trump not hold the election? Now, constitutionally, that is not allowed. That is not authorized. The Constitution specifically says first and unequivocally, first Tuesday in November, you are supposed to have at least the presidential elections. And I don't see any way that that could not happen in a constitutional setting. But it is noteworthy that Democrats, including Joe Biden, reportedly, according to Politico, have at least floated the notion that maybe Trump would not hold these elections, which sort of plays into this idea that they perpetuate that President Trump is the one who's very tyrannical in these certain ways and not to be trusted, while at the same time we have the Gretchen Whitmers of the world in Michigan who are shutting down businesses and getting judicial okay to do so.
Yeah, I can pretty much just from what I know and many trips to Washington, and I think I was hired as an intelligence officer, as I've said, not to make policy but collect the facts. I can pretty much assure America to a great degree that it is the other way around. It is not the president. It is not this administration that is not to be trusted. It is definitely the Democratic Party. And when they start suggesting things, then pay attention to it, because it's not just a suggestion. It's what they want to see happen, or it's a picture they want to paint so that they can create disturbances, so they can create a lack of trust in administration. I have to say that this administration, the people, the vice president, the president, and all of those work under him, it's just like the president making decisions. We have to remember that it's a cabinet, and it's some pretty smart people there. And from what I understand about most of those people, they're God fearing Americans. They love this country, and they know that outside of our democracy, this place, we would have nothing. And most people in America, especially younger generations, that did not grow up fighting the Cold War, when you talk about things like
Oh, yes.
socialism and communism, they laugh. They don't have any idea. They just don't know, and they think it can never happen. But Jimmy, it can happen. Communism and socialism is alive and well in the world, and it has never ever ceased to push itself on a country and take advantage of windows of opportunity like this as well. And I would highly recommend that for those younger generations that don't understand what it is, you need to put down your telephones and get online or something and study it. And surprisingly, you'll think, wow, that's what they're saying, and that's what I see, and this is happening, and this, and this, and this. And it, all of a sudden it becomes a reality. You say, oh my gosh, this is leading to people taking away my freedom.
Wow.
Lose your freedom,
Sure.
it's all over.
Yeah. Well, it is a travesty to see so much of the loss of liberty happen in such a short span of time. But we have to keep in mind, going to your point about communism and socialism and what have you, Nikita Khrushchev's quote from the 1960s that I shared a little bit ago about how communism would come to America. But we also need to keep in mind that we're not on a path that is predetermined. What is happening in terms of government growth and expansion, I would argue, has been going on for the past 100 plus years, especially since
Great.
1913, and what we saw with
Sure.
Woodrow Wilson and the 17th Amendment and the 16th Amendment, all these things that were taking place back 1913 on. But especially right now, it's up to every American to say, stop. There's a line here this far, no further, kind of channeling my inner Captain Picard from Star Trek. You cannot allow the loss of liberty to continue, and so we all need to be sharp and pay attention and speak up about it. But at the same time, we do have to recognize, as you point out, that there are two generations of Americans that don't know much about the Cold War. I mean, I was born in 1990, shortly after the Soviet Union officially fell and the Cold War was over, but so many of the things still linger, to your point. But also, I do want to say that some of what you've said today, Bazzel Baz, rings true, rings likely to me, at least to some extent. Some of it I need more persuasion in terms of the specific aspects of what you're saying with the deep state and what have you, because while I believe that there is a deep state of sorts that is involved in our government, I think we saw it play out with some of Russiagate and what have you. I think that some of it just sounds a little bit, even for me, knowing you and talking and interviewing you, and some of the things we've talked about coming to pass and what have you, sounds a little difficult to be believed, to be honest.
It's okay. I'm not here to convince anybody.
And
I
some
will
of it's
tell you the same
hypothetical,
thing,
so
same thing I told you like months ago when all this stuff was going to happen. I say, you know what? Let it play out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I hope I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not, and 8 months from now, a year from now, it raises its ugly head to the point where you go, oh my gosh, I didn't believe this could happen. Then we'll look back and go, oh my gosh, I guess you weren't so far off. I can only hope and pray that I'm so far off, Jimmy, honestly, that we're back to where we need to be, whatever our normal is back in America. But keep in mind, you said something that's really important, all the way since 1913. So whatever's in play has been in play for a long time. And my dad used to tell me this, and I'll leave this with you. He used to say, when he was talking about the nation, the changing of a nation, he said, if you and I are flying in a, I don't know, an F-16, And he said, and you take this stick and you yank it to the left really hard. He goes, you're going to pull so many G's that you know you're turning. He said, but what if I take that stick and I just turn it 2 degrees and just hold it there? He said, before you know it, we're 180 degrees in an opposite direction, and you never even realized we were turning. I never forgot that. And as I dealt with the Cold War, and we studied it more and more and all the trickery and whatever it may be, I started looking at that, and sure enough, since 1913, much to what you said, Jimmy, I think the stick has been turned 2 degrees. And we're slowly turning it. And unless Americans realize that, they're never going to adjust and put it back 2 degrees in the opposite direction so that we're flying the course that we need to fly.
Two quotes from founding fathers I think we should keep in mind. One, Thomas Jefferson, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And then James Madison, and this goes to the point of progression of government growth and power over time, since I argue particularly 1913. He said, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments by those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. So while we're starting to see some things get a little more violent, little more sudden, most of the loss of freedom that we've seen in this country over the decades has been slow and steady, incremental, which, by the way, gets to the point of what I see as the divide in the Democratic Party right now is between the incrementalists who want a slower and more steady win to the race versus the insta-changers who say we need to make things happen right now, no longer shall we wait. And that's an interesting divide, too, in the Democratic Party, I think.
Couldn't agree with you more, 100%. What will be interesting, what we'll be telling about Minnesota, and this will give me a little, and I'll be a little happier at this, if we start seeing Americans in their neighborhoods, Minnesota, wherever it may be, arming themselves against criminals that I'm talking about, not against law-abiding citizens, but all of a sudden the looters, the rioters, and they say, you're not coming here to do this in my neighborhood. And we see police and military allow them to do that, then I know we're all on the same sheet of music. But now, if I see military and police go into law-abiding citizens' neighborhoods and say, we're taking all your weapons away, we don't know who you are, and we're going to protect you, then I'm going to be concerned.
Final question, brief one, because we've gone quite a while. I appreciate your time. It's very interesting conversations always with you, Bazzel Baz. But I would be remiss if I didn't give you my standard question, which is, okay, you were Baz on the Blacklist. Hopefully Baz comes back alive. But you were there on the Blacklist. Also, you're a writer and producer in Hollywood. Paint a picture, tell a story, take what we've talked about, and turn it into a Blacklist plot, Bazzel Baz.
Oh, my gosh. You caught me a little off guard there. Okay.
You know it's going to come. I always ask you that question. So.
All right. So here we get a call. We see Red Reddington in a private meeting with a number of people where we don't know who they are. And they point out that the death of a certain American was a setup to fuel flames because they are actually going to arm a group of organized protesters so that they can create or escalate the riots under a time where people have been cooped up forever, and they know they can play on that. And Red Reddington comes to Baz and his team, and they say, "Look, we know who the instigators are, but the instigators are actually in Europe. They're doing this with a long reach. So the only thing we can do now is we have to stop the shipment of weapons that are going into the organized groups." So we go and we find the weapons coming in our shipping container. But instead of just stopping the weapons, Red Reddington gives us instructions to do something quite unique. And what we do is we put a small explosive charge in every single weapon. And so the weapons are handed out. As they end up on the street to fire upon the military and the police, what actually happens is all the weapons blow up in everybody's face and the bad guys are killed.
That sounds like it could be a Blacklist plot, although I haven't seen quite that way yet. I would normally think that Red Reddington would keep the weapons himself. He would find some way to keep him himself, and then maybe arm some militia in some
And
other country and help
didn't have to
orchestrate a
keep the
takeover
weapons.
there.
Yeah, he didn't have to keep the weapons himself, Jimmy, because what he did is he actually electronically intercepted the cash that went from the organization in Minnesota to the long reach guys in Europe, and which was, I don't know, $30 million. He kept that instead.
That makes sense. Now that is classic Raymond Reddington. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
always love just playing out those sort of Blacklist fantasies with you, Bazzel Baz. Put you on the spot this time, but you should know I ask you every time we have you on. Interesting conversation. At a minimum, you've given us a lot to think about, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us in a special report today, Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's always great being here. God bless you, man. God bless America. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you. You too. Stay well, be healthy, and be safe.
I will. All right. Roger.
Bazzel Baz joining us once again here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. An interesting perspective always. Some things to at least think about, consider. Okay, what are some of these things that could be real? I mean, he was the first person to tell me about the Wuhan lab in China and the possibility there before I saw it crop up in media outlets. And I've had some other conversations that have sort of played out. So a lot of interesting food for thought, to be sure, from Bazzel Baz here today on this special report from Jimmy at the Crossroads. You never know, of course, what things will turn out to be, how the progression of time will happen, but it certainly is quite fascinating. Thanks for watching this clip of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel. You do not want to miss our live show. Thanks for your support.
I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.